Every now and then we come across a fictional character whom we wish we knew more about. Lance Corporal Jack Jones is one such man. He was the much-loved geriatric veteran in the BBC comedy Dad's Army, with his catchphrase, "Don't panic!" The show, which ran from 1968 to 77, regularly had audiences of 18 million viewers and followed the antics of a Home Guard unit during World War II. He regularly told anecdotes about his time in Sudan serving with General Kitchener against the Mahdists. Now, I have made several videos about the British battles in Sudan, and amongst all the hundreds of comments that viewers have posted, countless people have referenced Lance Corporal Jones and one of his other catchlines, "They don't like it up 'em." And as so many of you like quoting him, I thought you might also like to find out about his military career. A career that, whilst fictional, parallels the real campaigns fought by a real regiment in the British Army. This is the military career of Lance Corporal Jack Jones from Dad's Army. What amazed me as I researched this character was how carefully the BBC had created a life story for him, and how it's linked to real historic events. Anyone who's watched Dad's Army will recall that Jones, apart from constantly making references to being with Kitchener in the Sudan fighting the Fuzzy Wuzzies and his love of the bayonet, "They don't like it up 'em," also had a chest full of medal ribbons. Here's the amazing thing. Those ribbons tell his fictitious life story. Here it is. Jack Jones was born in Wilmington-on-Sea in 1870. The town was somewhere on the Kent-Sussex coast of southern England, whereas Dad's Army was actually filmed in Thetford, Norfolk. Anyway, the son of George and Mildred Jones, according to the show's creators, joined the Royal Warwickshire Regiment as a drummer boy when he was 14 in 1884. The Royal Warwickshire Regiment were a genuine regiment in the British Army, now part of the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers. It dated back to King Charles II's time in the 1670s. In 1782, they were renamed the 6th Regiment of Foot, 1st Warwickshire Regiment. At the same time, the 24th Regiment of Foot became the 2nd Warwickshire Regiment, and many of you will know the 24th from the battles of Isandlwana and Rorke's in the Zulu War. Having fought in the Peninsular War and the North American War of 1812, the 6th Foot, 1st Warwickshire Regiment, were given their royal prefix by King William IV in 1832. Following the Chalmers reforms, they were officially renamed the Royal Warwickshire Regiment, consisting of 2 battalions, in 1881. 3 years later, Jack Jones joined the regiment. The BBC's fictitious backstory does not say which of the 2 battalions Jonesy joined, but I've done some detective work for you, and here's the result. Having studied his medal ribbons, which he wears on his Home Guard uniform in the shows, I've been able to put together a timeline of Lance Corporal Jones's military service. Those ribbons correspond to the genuine campaigns of the 1st Battalion, Royal Warwickshires. There's only one slight fly in the ointment, which I will come to in a while. But before that, let's follow young Jack Jones's career. In 1884, shortly after our beloved but fictional character had joined them, the 1st Battalion was sent to Egypt to join General Wolsey's Nile Expedition. I've made a video about the real-life military campaign, and I'll put a link in the description below. Despite Wolsey's expedition failing to rescue Charles Gordon in Khartoum and the British withdrawing from Sudan, the participating soldiers were issued with 2 campaign medals, the Egypt Medal and the Khedive's Star. Jones wears both of these ribbons over 50 years later on his Home Guard uniform. The Egypt Medal was awarded to all British soldiers who served in either the invasion of Egypt in 1882, high point of which was Wolsey's victory at the Battle of Tel el-Kebir, and the Nile Expedition and associated actions in Sudan in the 1880s. Interestingly, the medal was also awarded to the 300-plus Canadian boatmen who ferried the British soldiers up the Nile, and the Australians from the New South Wales contingent who landed on the Red Sea coast. The medal was also awarded to 17 nurses based in Egypt. They were the first women to ever receive a British Army campaign medal. The Khedive's Star was issued by the Egyptian ruler Tewfik Pasha in recognition of both the British and Egyptian troops who had tried to keep Sudan under his control. Note, until the Mahdi's revolution, Sudan was part of the Egyptian, not the British Empire. Later, the 1st Battalion of the Royal Warwickshire Regiment were to participate in the Anglo-Egyptian reconquest of Sudan between 1896 and 98. This was led by General Herbert Kitchener, whom Lance Corporal Jones refers to on many occasions during Dad's army. The battalion were involved at both the Battle of Atbara and then the climax to the campaign, the Battle of Omdurman. Here the Anglo-Egyptian forces routed the Sudanese followers of the Mahdi's successor. The battle also saw one of the last major cavalry charges by the British Army, a charge that included a young Winston Churchill, and the coolness of General Hector MacDonald as he faced off Mahdist attacks on two fronts. The video I've made about the Battle of Omdurman is one of my most watched videos, and I'll post a link to it at the end. Jones wears the ribbon for the Queen's Sudan Medal from this campaign. He also wears the ribbon of yet another medal issued by the Khedive of Egypt. Grateful that the Egyptians had regained control of Sudan, he issued all British, as well as his own soldiers, with the Khedive's Sudan Medal. Officially, Britain and Egypt were to rule Sudan jointly until the country was granted independence in the mid-1950s. Joint control in theory, but you can guess which country was really calling the shots. The 1st Battalion now moved on to India, where they replaced their sister battalion. The 2nd Battalion, who'd been in India and Ceylon, modern-day Sri Lanka, for the past 15 years, were finally getting a change of scene. However, they weren't heading back to Britain. Yet another conflict in Queen Victoria's empire was calling: the Boer War in South Africa. Despite participating in several bloody encounters, the 2nd Battalion were to have their ranks significantly thinned thanks to malaria and typhoid. Of the 22,000 British and Imperial soldiers to die overall in the Boer War, 2/3 were caused by disease rather than by Boer bullets. With their numbers drastically reduced, the 2nd Battalion Royal Warwickshire Regiment were pulled out of combat duty and sent to guard Boer prisoners of war in Bermuda. And now we reach an interesting point in the career of Lance Corporal Jones. To date, his medal ribbons correspond to the real timeline of the 1st Battalion. However, Jack Jones also wears the Queen's South Africa War Medal issued to participants in the Boer War. The 1st Battalion spent the whole war in India. So what's going on? Was Jonesy transferred to the 2nd Battalion? Or maybe he requested a transfer so he could see more action. He certainly tells stories of being a bit gung-ho in the First World War, and anyone who's watched Dad's Army will know that Jones is always volunteering to put himself in harm's way, despite his age. The BBC trail goes cold. But there is another intriguing Boer War medal ribbon that he wears: the King's South Africa War Medal. Whilst the Boer War started during Queen Victoria's reign, it finished in 1902 during the reign of her son, King Edward VII. This King's Medal was issued only to soldiers who were in South Africa at the very end of the war, 31st of May 1902, and who had spent the previous 18 months in the war zone. We know that the 2nd Battalion had gone to Bermuda, so how was Jones still there at the very end? Had the action-seeking Jones volunteered for another unit, like a mounted infantry outfit, for instance? Despite his many war stories about General Kitchener and the Sudan, Jones doesn't talk about the Boer War. So those two medals are a bit of a mystery. Anyway, he does seem to have ended up back with the 1st Battalion in India afterwards. And we know that because yet another one of his medal ribbons is the Indian General Service Medal, 1909. This was issued to soldiers who saw action on the northwest frontier between 1908 and 1911. And we do know that the 1st Battalion were indeed up there on the wild borders with Afghanistan at this time. In early 1908, they were part of a British military expeditionary force in the Bazar Valley campaign against Pashtun, also called Pathan, tribesmen. And then later in the same year, a private from the battalion was killed on the Momad expedition nearby. And Jones certainly talks about fighting the Pathan tribesmen. So once again, his stories, his campaign medals, and the real history of the 1st Battalion, Royal Warwickshires, coincide. In 1914, Britain's colonial wars paled into insignificance with the outbreak of the First World War. Jack Jones was now 44 and had served in the British Army for 30 years. Those 30 years were rewarded with the Army Long Service and Good Conduct Medal, another ribbon on his chest. Instituted by King William IV, the same monarch who gave the Warwickshire regiments their royal prefix, it was the first non-campaigning medal introduced into the British Army. In August 1914, the 1st Battalion, who were now back in Warwickshire, stationed just outside the town of Kenilworth, were dispatched immediately for the continent. Less than 3 weeks after Britain's declaration of war, they were part of the British Expeditionary Force marching to face the Germans at Mons in Belgium. Lance Corporal Jones's battalion fought in those very first encounters, including the Battle of Mons. It was during those early battles that one of their officers was wounded and was awarded the DSO for his actions, Bernard Montgomery. The Warwickshires were part of the retreat from Mons back to the River Marne, and they were still on the front line at Christmas and participated in the famous Christmas Truce of 1914. Jones wears the ribbon of the 1914 Star. Also called the Mons Star, this was only issued to British and Indian soldiers who fought in France or Belgium during that limited period of the 5th of August to the 22nd of November 1914. He tells his comrades in the Wilmington-on-Sea Home Guard that he was invalided out of the army in 1915 due to poor eyesight. Indeed, his eyesight is so bad that when he signs on for the Home Guard, instead of signing the papers, he signs the table. Jones seemed to enjoy his First World War experiences. He claims he was called the Mad Bomber because he used to madly throw grenades about. And on another occasion, he announced he hadn't had so much fun since he was in the trenches. Along with the 1914 Star, Jones also wears the British War Medal and the Allied Victory Medal. When worn together, these medals were nicknamed Pip, Squeak and Wilfred, who were popular cartoon characters at the time. With a chest full of medals, Jack Jones finally entered Civvy Street. Heading back to his hometown of Wilmington-on-Sea, he established himself as a butcher with a shop at 19 the High Street. The peace bought with the blood of the fallen of the First World War lasted just 20 years. The Second World War saw Britain at her gravest peril. With her army defeated in Europe and hastily evacuated from Dunkirk and the fall of France, Britain was left alone to face the might of Hitler's Third Reich. As the RAF battled the German Luftwaffe for control of the skies, the Germans prepared for the invasion of Britain, codenamed Sea Lion. In preparation for the coming invasion, the government called on all men aged 18 to 65 not serving in the forces to join the local defence volunteers. Eventually, 1.5 million men would join what became known as the Home Guard. And it was the antics of the Home Guard unit in this fictional Wilmington-on-Sea that provided the backdrop to the 80 episodes of Dad's Army that ran from 1968 to 1977. Butcher Jack Jones comes to enrol in the Home Guard armed with a fearsome dervish spear, a souvenir from his Sudan days. Following his fictional biography, he is now 70, but lies about his age, claiming he's 60 to make sure that he can join. Apart from his tales of past campaigns against the Fuzzy Wuzzies and his trust in a bayonet they don't like it up 'em, he is also an enthusiastic member of the unit, always volunteering for the most dangerous tasks. This probably reflects his previous enthusiasm, but it also has a more practical reason too. And here it is. Clive Dunn, who played the much-loved Lance Corporal Jones, was not quite the doddering old fool that comes across in Dad's Army. When the show started, he was just 48. Many of the other characters were considerably older, and thus by default, when they needed anything dangerous or slightly wild, Clive Dunn was physically able to do them. Those antics, as played by Dunn, just made Jones even a more lovable and laughable character. At its height, Dad's Army was attracting 18 million views per episode. Despite 80 episodes, they never actually got to the end of the war in 1945, so we never know what happened to the Home Guard unit at Wilmington-on-Sea. But assuming that Lance Corporal Jones was still alive, he would have qualified for one more medal, the Defence Medal. That's not a bad collection of medals for a man who, although purely fictional, gave so much service to his country. Actually, his actor, Clive Dunn, had played his part in real life too. During the Second World War, he served with the 4th Queen's Own Hussars in Greece and had been captured. He spent 4 years in a German POW camp in Austria. After the war, he resumed his acting career and in 1968 landed the role of Jones in Dad's Army. And what a character he played. Charming, eccentric, enthusiastic. His catchphrases are some of the best remembered from the show. Obviously, there are the references to his previous military adventures, but let's never forget "Permission to speak, sir," and the most famous one of all, "Don't panic!" Whilst Lance Corporal Jones is fictional, there were many men in the Home Guard who probably did have similar stories to tell. Tales from the previous World War, the Boer War, India and Sudan. Already in the 1940s, they were the tales from a bygone age. But despite their ages, when the chips were down for Britain in 1940, they flocked to the colours one more time, just like Lance Corporal Jones. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed that video. And if you did, then please click the like button below. Why not join my supporters club as well? Plenty more stories coming your way. But in the meantime, thanks for your support, keep well, and I'll see you very soon.